Okay, thank you. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to call the meeting to order, the April 15th, 2021 meeting of the Guelph Police Services Board. Board members and police service members are attending this electronic meeting remotely. This meeting is being held remotely due to the COVID-19 pandemic and is being live streamed and recorded. Now, for the territorial acknowledgement. Today, we acknowledge the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation of the Anishinaabe peoples on whose traditional territory we are meeting. Item 3 on your agenda is declaration. Is there a declaration of conflict or pecuniary interest from any of the members? Not seeing any. We'll move to item number 4, closed session resolutions, if any. And Mr. Mayor, I believe you have one.
Yes, thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair, I'll move that the amount of $2,500 be donated to the Guelph Humane Society, specifically in remembrance to Jennifer Kovac and her love for animals and for the capital works that are happening at the Guelph Humane Society. I think it's a great use of the community funds to go through to them for such an initiative. So I'll move the $2,500. It's seconded by Councillor Billings.
Okay, thank you. And all those in favor? And that motion is carried. Thank you. Okay, moving now to item number 5, we have a presentation, and I'll now ask the chief to introduce our presenter.
Mr. Chair, my point of order just for a second. Are we going to be setting the agenda at all today? Is that on the agenda for us, or is that something you're going to do after the presentation?
The approval of the agenda is after the presentation.
That's right. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. I can't toggle between both screens, so I couldn't remember if it was prior to. So thank you very much.
Not a problem.
Okay, through you, Mr. Chair, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so thanks very much. So today, Inspector Steve Gill and Sergeant Brad Saint are going to give us a presentation, and it's further to the board's request to get a bit of an understanding and some insight into how the opiate crisis has been impacting our community. So I'm going to introduce Inspector Steve Gill and Sergeant Brad Saint. Before I turn it over to Steve, I just wanted to acknowledge there's so many leaders in our community who that we work with and who are part of supporting so many struggling with addictions or homelessness. And 2 people that it's really important that I think we acknowledge. Adrian Crowder. Adrian's the manager of the Wellington Guelph Drug Strategy, as well as Rochelle Devereaux, the executive director of the Guelph Community Health Center. I'm sure Brad may allude to this, but we work closely with Adrian and Rochelle on a number of things, and it's really important. We certainly have a role, but I think the community benefits from the leadership of so many people. So with that, I'll turn it over to Inspector Gill.
Thank you very much, Chief. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah,
I think so, yeah.
Good afternoon, Chair Carter, and to the rest of the board, and thank you for allowing Sergeant Saint and I to provide you with an update on the current substance abuse situation here in the city of Guelph. Specifically, we would like to highlight the use of opioids, mainly fentanyl, and the harmful impacts the use of this drug has had on our community. We have a brief PowerPoint presentation we would like to share with you, and we would certainly be happy following the PowerPoint to answer any questions you may have. For your information, Sergeant Saint and I are participating members of the Wellington Guelph Drug Strategy. As the chief has indicated, this strategy is led by Adrian Crowder, who has done some absolutely fantastic work and is extremely passionate about her role. And I would say we are very fortunate to have her involved in this type of work. Currently, efforts are underway through the drug strategy and partnering agencies to formulate a new post-overdose response program. This program will hopefully better serve those who may be who would maybe benefit from such services in our community. Ms. Crowder has allowed me to utilize some of the infographics we created using information from the police services, as well as the Wellington Dufferin Guelph Public Health and other partnering agencies. From a policing perspective, we really started seeing opioid issues back in 2015, and since then, opioids have continued to grow. Opioid use has continued to grow in our community and presents several challenges. Unfortunately, many people were introduced to opioids through their family doctors as a pain medication, and it caused them to become dependent on opioids and fentanyl in particular. As you can see by the graphic here, local data indicates that even as opioid prescribing rates have fallen, the human cost of opioids is climbing. Again, the graphic here shows an overall decrease in prescription painkillers, but this has beneficial and negative impacts. Unfortunately, as prescriptions decrease, the illegal market used for opioids increases. Also, as you can see, from 2019 to 2020, the death rate has drastically increased from 7 to 24 in 2020. Also, the non-fatal overdoses in Guelph has increased at a rate of 33% over that time period. And we actually suspect this to be much higher, as these are the known overdoses that we are aware of. Unfortunately, we have also seen increases in visits to our emergency department. As you can see, we've had a 48% increase between 2017 to 2019. As mentioned, even though there's a decrease in the prescription pills, we've seen a direct correlation between this decrease and the increase in fentanyl. And that's highlighted in the graphic there you see in your bottom right. The struggle to tackle this issue is very complicated and must be approached at various levels and in a very strategic fashion. This is why we work closely together with partner agencies to develop best practices. From a policing perspective, certainly COVID-19 has added additional challenges to the work that we do. It's very difficult for Sergeant Saint and his team, as well as frontline officers, to investigate these types of matters at the best of times. Adding the risk of COVID into dealing with what is already arguably a high-risk population just increases the overall complexity of the situation. And we also recognize that COVID-19 increases the struggle for those suffering with addiction. This work can be sometimes frustrating as we see the harm of opioids on our community. COVID has also impacted the number of people not being held in custody, which can lead to perpetuating drug trafficking and other offenses. But through this COVID stretch, certainly Sergeant Saint has done a stellar job leading our drug unit in their efforts and has tackled this issue from various angles. So I'd like to turn it over now to Sergeant Saint to discuss some of the approaches being utilized. Sergeant Saint.
Thank you, Inspector Gill, and thank you to Chair Carter and the Police Service Board for this opportunity to speak on this very important topic. I've been a police officer for approximately 16 years, and about half of that time I've spent investigating drug offenses. Currently, I'm the supervisor of our drug unit, and I've seen our city kind of go through some different challenges over the years, using from different substances, including crack cocaine, methamphetamine, and the current fentanyl crisis. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about some initiatives that our police service, in conjunction with our community partners, have undertaken in response to the opioid epidemic. Touch on some prevention, harm reduction strategies, some education we're offering our officers and members in our community, and some enforcement initiatives. So our police officers, our frontline guys, are attending to have attended over 300 overdose occurrences in the past 15 months. So unfortunately, that's almost daily that we're going to these overdose occurrences, and quite unfortunate, over 30 of those incidents have been fatal incidents. Like Inspector Gill alluded to, there is probably a lot more overdoses that are occurring in our community that are going unreported to emergency services. To put it in perspective, the fentanyl crisis into perspective, we've experienced just about the same amount of overdose deaths as COVID deaths in the past 15 months. We've seen a sharp increase in overdose occurrences over the last few years. And these increase in overdose deaths could be COVID related. Those suffering from addiction have less access to supports during lockdowns, and substance abuse can be elevated as a way to deal with the stresses of isolation. Many of these overdose deaths can be prevented with life-saving intervention. All of our officers carry naloxone, and our primary role as responding officers is to save life. Unfortunately, many people use opioids alone, and therefore there is an increased chance in a fatal overdose. Each overdose death is thoroughly investigated by our officers. Every life has meaning, and the family of those overdose victims deserve to know what happened to their loved ones. Our goal is to provide closure to the families and to hold the fentanyl traffickers criminally responsible for the death if possible. Good Samaritan Act. With the increase in police presence as first responders at the scene of an overdose, there became a bit of a hesitation by people to call 911 if someone was overdosing. There was some belief that perhaps people at the scene may be charged or investigated for drug possession charges. In 2017, the Good Samaritan Act came into effect across Canada. It provides legal protection for those at the scene experiencing an overdose and those trying to assist. For example, if there was a small amount of a controlled substance such as fentanyl on the table and the police entered to assist with an overdose, there would be legal protection for all those at the scene from a charge of possession of a controlled substance. So our officers know that our primary role at the scene is life-saving first and foremost. Talk a little bit about Safe Supply. The Guelph Community Health Center began a pilot project providing a safe supply of opioids in the form of hydromorphone. Hydromorphone is a small capsule. It's also known as Dilaudid. So they're providing hydromorphone to those suffering from addiction. Hydromorphone typically would be prescribed for severe pain, and now it's being provided as an alternative to street drugs. So Jan Klotz and Rochelle Devereaux at the Community Health Center have spearheaded this initiative and have seen some very promising results. The Safe Supply project provides those struggling with addiction with a controlled dosage of opioids to enable them to focus on their mental and physical well-being. The opioid addiction comes with a physical dependency so strong that those struggling with addiction often resort to committing crimes to obtain money to get drugs. Fentanyl is very expensive on the street, costing approximately $200 per gram. The goal is that by providing a safe supply of opioids to the individual, they can focus on stability, on getting a job, getting housing, and getting help with their addiction. So another important community member that we work with is public health. So we provide daily information to public health about overdose occurrences that we are attending to. So our information contributes to the FAST alert system. FAST stands for flexible, accessible, scalable, and timely. So Michael White, he's a health promotion specialist at Public Health. He takes this information along with other data provided by our community partners, such as those on the Wellington Guelph Drug Strategy. And he takes this information and we work to alert the community of a particularly potent strain of fentanyl should one exist. And so the goal is that if we can provide those affected by addiction with an advanced warning system of a stronger substance in our community, they can access the supports that are in our community to prevent a tragic overdose. So an example of an alert here, this one was sent out in January. Unfortunately, this alert was the result of having lost 4 of our community members in 1 week to an overdose. This type of alert is shared via our Guelph Police Media Office. As well, in the drug unit, we have a Twitter account. And as soon as we become aware of this, we will share it via Twitter. And it's often picked up by traditional media outlets as well. Talk a little bit about education. So our officers in the drug unit are providing training to our new officers. So all the recruits in training that are coming into the Guelph Police Service. We also are training members of our Guelph ER staff on drug trends, including opioids in our community. In December, we hosted a drug investigation training course. 22 officers attended this in-house drug training held over 2 days. We actually held the training twice over 2 weeks so that we could get the 22 people through it with some safe physical distancing due to COVID. Some of the topics we covered were overdose response and investigations. And the officers that attended found it very valuable, was the feedback that we received. Members in the drug unit are also assisting our courts. We assist in as court experts in drug trafficking. So we may be called to court to assist in interpreting drug indicia in a drug trafficking case. We also make regular presentations to our community's youth in the schools and at our youth engagement program. So here's an example of fentanyl powder that has been seized in our community. So on the left is some purple fentanyl, just under 1 gram, and that small amount would cost approximately $200. On the right, some green fentanyl was 139 grams. So fentanyl in its purest form, when it's illegally manufactured, is actually a white powder. So it's often colored by the drug trafficker to distinguish fentanyl from other drugs such as cocaine. The color is often used as a bit of a branding tool by the drug trafficker as well. We've also seized not only fentanyl, but carfentanil, which is 100 times more potent than fentanyl and looks identical to fentanyl. So as you could probably imagine, that could be very deadly in our community if someone thinks that they're buying fentanyl, but is actually buying carfentanil. We're also frequently seeing fentanyl analogs. So an analog is a slightly different chemical makeup of fentanyl, but the ill effects are identical. So any substance that we seize, we send a small amount away to Health Canada for chemical analysis. So fentanyl is a synthetic opioid. It's 50 times more potent than heroin, 100 times more potent than morphine, and it's prescribed legally to treat severe pain. The legal form is usually a transdermal time release patch, and we were seeing those a few years ago being bought and sold and used illegally. But we're not seeing that very much at all anymore. Primarily in Guelph, we will see what you see on the slides here, which is a form of fentanyl powder. So in Guelph, we undertake some smaller street-level investigations, and we also will do larger undercover and multi-jurisdictional investigations. We regularly share information and work with other agencies such as the OPP, Waterloo Regional, Stratford. We also work with and share information with Toronto, Peel, and York Region to investigate those that are bringing fentanyl into our community. We're looking to investigate those that are seeking profit from the struggles of others. Our information sharing has led to successful search warrants both in Guelph and in multiple cities across southern Ontario, and even as far north as Kirkland Lake. We use all the resources available to us to investigate these drug traffickers. And we use a multitude of search warrant and surveillance techniques to fully investigate these individuals. So as a result of our focus on fentanyl traffickers and because of the prevalence of it in our community, we have observed a drastic increase in fentanyl seizures. I remember in 2015, I was a part of the investigative team that seized this 23.8 grams. It was a single seizure, and it was rare. We weren't seeing it in Guelph at all, and our surrounding communities also weren't seeing it very often. As you can see, from 2015 to 2020, we seized over 1,000 grams of fentanyl. 1,000 grams of fentanyl, if sold by the gram, would be valued at over $200,000. So it's quite significant. So we'll continue to work hard to bring those that are selling fentanyl in our community to justice. And at this point, if you have any questions or want me to explore a topic in greater detail, I can do my best to do so.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. We have a question from Rod.
Rod, I believe you're muted.
Sorry, I just wanted to thank them for the presentation. And the only question I had was that we found through investigation that it's being manufactured in Guelph?
No, we have not. We've not encountered that at all. We suspect and believe it's outside of Canada being manufactured.
Okay, is fentanyl our biggest concern in relation to drugs in Guelph, or is it something else?
It's definitely something we're encountering regularly, and we're seeing lives being ruined by it. We're seeing lives being gripped by addiction, and it's something we focus on. We do still investigate other controlled substances. Powder cocaine we're seeing is still readily available. Crystal meth. And some illegal cannabis as well.
Yeah, I don't want to date myself, but back when I was doing your job, it was heroin in Guelph that was the big thing. So
yeah, so we saw heroin, a bit of a resurgence of heroin a few years ago, and any heroin was being seized. Often it was turning up mixed with fentanyl, and now we're rarely seeing any heroin and strictly fentanyl.
Other questions? No? I'm not hearing any other questions. I would like to thank Inspector Gill and Sergeant Saint for giving us this presentation. I know, speaking personally, I wasn't aware of the severity of the problem and how it's grown throughout the years. So obviously, this is a very important thing for the community to get under control. And hopefully going forward, we're going to see these numbers drop. But thank you very much for giving us this presentation and making us aware of this problem and the complexity and the amount of the problem or the size of the problem. And I think sort of knowing that is a starting point to go forward. So once again, thank you very much.
You're most welcome.
Yes, you're welcome. My pleasure.
Okay, so we'll move on now in the agenda. And item 6 in the agenda is approval of the open meeting minutes dated March 18th, 2021. Do I have a motion? And Rod, yes, and seconded by Mr. Mayor. And all those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. Moving on to item 7 is the approval of the agenda. And are there any additions to the agenda, Mr. Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. First of all, I'd be happy to move for the approval of the agenda, but I would like to just make an amendment, if that's possible, that I'd like to add an item called repeat offenders and community safety. And I'd like to just ask and talk about that issue maybe at the end of the agenda, if you don't mind adding it.
Sure.
So I'll move that with that amendment.
Okay, and that'll be in the part 2 discussion agenda. Okay.
Sure. I think Councillor Billings is willing to. Sorry, I think Councillor Billings is willing to second it there.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the movement. That's the motion to add to the agenda, which you just mentioned. All those in favor of that? And that's carried. And do we have a motion now for the revised agenda?
Yeah, I'll move it as amended then. Yep.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. And second by Christine Billings. Thank you. All those in favor? And that's carried as well. Thank you. Okay. Well, we'll move.
And just a request, Mr. Chair, if Rod, I think you need to mute. You're coming through here. There you go. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. You're welcome. Okay, so first item would be I guess we haven't moved the consent agenda yet. And Christine, seconded by Peter McCherry. Thank you. All those in favor? And that's carried. So we'll move on to the discussion agenda. First item is 7.7, and that's the Finance Committee report. And Chief, are you going to? Oh, Christine. Pardon me.
That's okay.
I should mention Christine is the chair of our Finance Committee, and that was a big faux pas on my part not to call her Christine.
No, that's okay. I just didn't know if you wanted me to take the lead or you wanted the chief to do the intro to the finance report.
Well, I think you could, Christine. It's okay.
Okay. So the Finance Committee met to discuss the preliminary 2020 operating surplus, which is almost 384,000, which represents 0.8% of our budget. The committee's recommendation to the board is on page 21 in the package. And the recommendation is that the Guelph Police Service Board approve the GPS 2020 preliminary year-end surplus to be transferred to the police operating contingency reserve and that this information be relayed to the city. We have to make a request to the city for this transfer to take place. It'll go to the chief financial officer, and then a report is written to council, and council can either approve this request or not. Reason for the committee suggesting that we transfer it to the contingency reserve is because it's a good idea to have that buffer with respect to unforeseen expenses in the future, especially when the city is moving towards multi-year budgeting. So if anyone has a question with respect to the report, I'm sure the chief would be happy to answer.
Okay. Any questions on the Finance Committee report?
So I would need a mover then for the recommendation.
Okay, thank you.
Moved by the mayor, seconded by Peter. All in favor? Carried.
Thank you.
Back to you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. The next item on our agenda is item 7.8, and it's the Human Resources Strategies Annual Report. And Chief, are you going to introduce it, or are we going to go right to Kelly?
Sure. Oh, no, I'll introduce it. Can you hear me?
Okay.
Can you?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Okay. So before I introduce Kelly, I think it's we don't need to. I don't need to itemize how unique and challenging and dynamic 2020 was, but I think for those of you who don't know, so Kelly is in charge of our human resources services, and in addition to navigating COVID-19 and providing support to, I believe as of today, approximately 50% of all of our people were in some way impacted by isolations or things like that. So whether it be how our people were impacted by COVID-19, we onboarded 30 new positions last year and literally did countless internal transfers and moves. So I think it's important that as a board, we, as a service center board, we kind of acknowledge the work Kelly's done, because it is truly amazing the work she was able to get done in any year, let alone a COVID year. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Kelly. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you, Chief, and good afternoon. I am pleased to present to the board the Human Resources Services Annual Report for 2020, which demonstrates the progress that was made during the year. I will start with highlighting that in 2020, we celebrated 36 civilian and police members who reached service milestones of either 10, 15, 20, 30, or 35 years of service with Guelph Police, as well as 27 members or teams that received internal awards of recognition and 4 who were recognized externally. 2020 brought challenges to all employers with the COVID-19 pandemic, and I would like to point out that despite these challenges, Guelph Police adapted, and the human resources and professional development and recruiting functions continued. To demonstrate some of the impact of COVID-19 at Guelph Police, I will provide some statistics from the beginning of the pandemic. We have had 13 total members who have been positive for COVID-19. All have recovered and returned to work. We did have 1 outbreak at Guelph Police Service. There were 5 positive cases associated with this outbreak, and 14 high-risk contacts were identified. As the chief mentioned, there have been to date over half of our total employees have been impacted by isolation requirements for one COVID-related reason or another. So approximately 173 employees have required isolation, which totals over 8,500 hours, which, to put that into perspective, if you look at that in terms of a working year being 2,080 hours, that would be approximately 4 working years of time as a result of COVID-required isolations. Despite the 2020 COVID-19 challenges with outreach initiatives, Guelph Police received 534 police recruit applications, which is a significant increase from the 154 that were received the year prior. Having the assistance of the new administrative position in PDRU, as well as the new applicant tracking system, were both helpful with receiving, screening, and processing of the 246% more applications than the year before. The increased applicants helped to fill the 17 new police positions in the 2020 budget, as well as vacancies due to resignations and retirements. We also received 25 applications from experienced police officers from other services, and we did hire and onboard 4 experienced officers in 2020. In 2020, we were also able to attract more civilian applicants who have experience with a previous police service. Last year, we hired and onboarded 8 civilians who brought experience from a previous service, which significantly reduces the training requirements. And as a result, they are able to get signed off to perform the duties of their position more quickly. While many in-person training opportunities were delayed and canceled in 2020 due to the pandemic, internal transfer opportunities and virtual courses, conferences, and workshops increased, as you will have read in the report, to allow for us to continue to focus on member skill development. Equity, diversity, and inclusion have been common themes in much of the work that's being done by PDRU and HR, and we'll continue that into 2021. As soon as possible, there are plans for recruitment outreach initiatives at job fairs that are focused on diversity and presentations to community groups, as well as continuing with diversity and inclusion training for recruits and all employees at Guelph Police Service. We continue to be committed to member safeguard programs and wellness initiatives, which includes the addition of our new wellness coordinator position to support employee wellness and expansion to the existing safeguarding program, which will be rolled out in 2021. Resilience and mindfulness training continued in 2020 for all new recruits. And through bargaining, there was also an expansion to our psychological supports, which included broadening eligible service providers with this benefit to better support our members. While COVID-19 impacted our ability to run group initiatives for most of the year, we implemented an organizational portal in addition to other standard initiatives that are listed in the report in order to provide our members with quick one-click access to all of the supports that GPS offers to members and their families. Members were also supported with reliable and timely information regarding COVID-19 matters, as well as newsletters and other information to provide health and safety and wellness supports. Increased retirements have continued at Guelph Police Service with 11 police and civilian retirements in 2020. It is expected that over the next 5 years, we could see 16 civilian and 20 police retirements, which the senior leadership team continues to strategize to manage these anticipated gaps. More details can be found in the report, including participation rates and year-over-year changes in the appendix. Do you have any questions?
Any questions for Kelly from the board? No questions. Okay. Oh, Chief.
And through you, Mr. Chair, again, I just wanted to very publicly thank Kelly. I know the board has been able to read the last year's summary of the work that was done. And again, given in context of a COVID-19 year, it's extraordinary work. So just thanks very much, Kelly.
Thank you. I'll pass that along to everyone on the team that contributed, most certainly. Thank you.
And I'd like to add my thanks as well, Kelly, for all the work that you've done. And I know in just a brief time you've given us a summary of it, but I can quite imagine that the work involved was extensive. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
Okay, ready to move on. Next item is the Chief's monthly, item 7.9, Chief's monthly report.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to kind of on behalf of the service welcome our community to, I think this is our first live stream meeting, and I think we look forward to kind of increasing how we can be transparent, engaged, and really inform our community. One thing I wanted to talk about for the board today is, as I know the board is aware, last month our 2020 annual use of force report was presented. Each of these incidents is taken very seriously by our members, our service, and the board. Each of these incidents is reviewed and are reported on both quarterly and annually. These reports are available for our public to review on our website. Quite understandably, and I know the board is aware that our report was released last month, quite understandably, our annual use of force report was reported on by our media partners. Given the importance of the issue, we both respect and expect that our media partners would share their perspective in relation to our use of force reports. The transparency of our reporting process is in fact designed to ensure our community has the opportunity to review, understand, and ask questions in relation to our reports. I believe strongly as community leaders, business leaders, leaders in education, medicine, media, and certainly policing and all areas, we must all work together to build stronger, healthier, and more united communities. I wanted to provide some information to the board today and to the community, because I must admit, when I saw the front page of the paper last night when I got home, the first thing I thought of was the impact that front page headline would have on our community. Specifically, how would it impact the trust that we're working to build with our BIPOC community, and how would it impact our members who have been through so much in the last year and continue to work tirelessly to support our community through the pandemic, and also our ongoing efforts as a service to grow, learn, evolve, and best serve and represent our diverse community. With this in mind, given the importance of the discussion and being mindful of the fact that the majority of our community probably does not get the chance to review our use of force reports on our website, I wanted to, with your permission, Mr. Chair, share with our community some information in relation to our 2020 annual use of force report and the reporting process in general. So I'll just stop there if anybody has any questions, and I just wanted to share some information.
Any questions? Not seeing any. So you could proceed, Chief.
Okay. So during 2020, the Guelph Police Service responded to 78,794 calls for service. Of those, there were 50 reportable use of force incidents, which required one or more levels of force to bring the situation to a successful conclusion. This represents approximately 1 in every 1,576, or 0.06% of our total calls for service. It's important to note that use of force includes everything from the use of OC, or what we might call pepper spray, to drawing a conducted energy weapon, taser, or firearm, up to and including the discharge of these devices. Of note is the fact that 39 of the 100 instances, or 39% of the use of force options utilized, involved removing a taser or a firearm from its holster without discharging these devices. Last year, there were 2 reported incidents of Guelph Police Service firearms being discharged, both of them to euthanize injured wildlife. It's important to note that overall, use of force incidents within the Guelph Police Service have trended downwards, with significantly fewer such incidents reported in 2020 than in any of the previous 5 years. Our service presents our board a summary of all use of force incidents each quarter. These summaries include a synopsis of the incident encountered by our members and a description of the use of force used. These reports are available for our community to view on our websites. As of January 1st, 2020, police services in Ontario have been required to include a subject's perceived race in all use of force reports. This information is provided based on the province's 7 race categories. These are Black, East/South Asian, Indigenous, Latino, Middle Eastern, South Asian, and White. Since the summer of 2020, in the interest of ensuring greater transparency, the Guelph Police Service voluntarily began including race data in each of our quarterly use of force reports presented to our board. Moving forward, all quarterly use of force reports will similarly include data about the race and number of subjects involved for each of the specific incidents reported on. You'll get the first one next month. Officers are trained and instructed to assess each situation and respond with the appropriate level of force, taking into account public safety, subject safety, and officer safety. The vast majority of incidents in which our members are required to submit use of force reports involve very dynamic situations, which often see our members confronted with firearms and/or edged weapons. The execution of judicially authorized search warrants and providing assistance to other police services also represent a number of these incidents. Of those subjects involved in use of force incidents during 2020, 11 were identified as Black. As indicated, those incidents in which use of force is required overwhelmingly involve weapons, search warrants, and other high-risk scenarios. Specifically, with regard to those incidents involving individuals identified as Black subjects, 7 of the 8 incidents involved edged weapons or firearms, and the 8th involved a vehicle pursuit. So just to clarify there for the board and for the community who may be listening. So last year, there were 8 incidents involving a total of 11 people. Of those 8 incidents, 7 involved edged weapons or firearms, and the 8th involved a vehicle pursuit. Just for clarity there, I wasn't sure. And finally, I just wanted to, again, assure both the community and the board, all use of force reports are reviewed internally and reported to the Ministry of the Solicitor General. We will continue to ensure this important area is closely monitored and reported on to you, our Police Services Board, and our community. And with that, Mr. Chair, I welcome any questions.
Thank you, Chief. Questions? Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the Chief of addressing this. I must say that some of the data and the way the context, the way you've explained it here today for us and for the community is it dives a little bit deeper and further to give that context than what the entire community read on the front page of the Tribune and in the articles the last couple of days. So I just want to, I guess, thank you for that. Is that information available for? Well, it's available now because we're in the meeting here. But was that information available prior to the article going out, or?
Well, actually, we've worked really hard, as I alluded to in my preamble there. We work very hard to support transparency, and in fact, after my preamble there, so where the comments I just read, basically started during 2020. The vast majority of what I just read to you was in fact read word for word from what we provided our media partners, because we feel it's important to provide that level of transparency. So I just read to you essentially, not exactly, but virtually word for word, the information that was provided.
Okay. And then, one of the things I just want to comment, Mr. Chair, one of the things I also want to just say, excuse me, is I never thought of it through the lens, like your response today, Chief, I never thought of it through the lens of how you started this discussion about how, those in our community that would see the headline of that article would view that. And I just really appreciate that lens that you've used. I think that's really an important message, because the context is important. The correct narrative is important. And so taking the time today to address that, it means a lot to me, because now I know I'm further engaged and educated a little bit further. But it does, I think, send a message to the community in a very positive way, that they need to know that our police force is doing their job properly and is the context of when those use of force incidences occurred were justified through edge weapons and or guns. And the last thing is the clarity that I want as a question, and this sums it up for me. How many calls were there again? 79,000, 78,000?
Last year, there were 78,794 calls for service. Of those, there were 50 reportable use of force incidents. And as I know, this is all in our board report.
Yeah.
But that represents 1 in every 1,576 calls.
And that is, you said 0.06% of the overall impact?
Yeah.
And it's gone down in the last 5 years.
And I think though, I want to emphasize, it could be 1 in every 10,000, and each one is still incredibly important and reviewed. Yeah. And so.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. One is important. Absolutely. I thank you for taking the time, Chief. I do, through you, Mr. Chair. I really thank you for taking the time to give that context. It's important, very important, and I think it might have been lost over the last couple of days. So thank you very much.
Are there any questions? Are there questions for Chief Colby? Yeah. Oh.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I got one more, if you don't mind. Have you had any interaction or response to the article the last couple of days, Chief? And have you had a chance to also talk about relationships and how the force and relationships work with some that might have concerns?
Yes. Well, I think that.
Like, how do you address that? Obviously it's an important topic. The narrative is important. The context is important. The data is important. But at the end of the day, it's about relationships. So I want to know how is that being addressed with you? What's your focus?
Well, maybe I'll start with the first thing I thought of when I got home last night was, what was it like if you're a member of our BIPOC community and you saw that front page headline on your kitchen table last night, how does that impact the trust? And how does that impact how we can bring our community together? We have and will continue to work to demonstrate our commitment and to build and earn the trust of our community. And I think that is going to be a process that evolves, that has to be a sustained, ongoing effort in which we will work to create a new normal with what policing looks like, how we engage with our community. There's countless leaders, and Mr. Mayor, you deal with them every day. And I think this is about how can we as community leaders seek to bring the community together and have difficult but important conversations, and then at the end, have a healthier, more united community than we had before. So I could go on at length, Mr. Mayor, because I think we're both quite passionate about this, but I hope I've answered your question a little bit.
No, you have. I think I'll also just say this too, that yes, we have an obligation to earn trust with our community, but we also have an obligation to protect our community. And when I hear of these incidences that have to do with edge weapons and with guns, we have an obligation as a police force to protect our community as well. And I think that context for these incidents are important, that we had our service, our members, protecting our community and doing the duty that they're called to do, sworn to do, to protect our community in all of these types of incidences. So thank you very much.
Are there any other questions for Chief Kobe? Not seeing any. Chief, I just wanted to add my thank you for the research on this, and it was a very informative and important presentation to clarify the operation in terms of the use of force. So I'm going to add my thanks to Mayor Guthrie's thanks as well. And on behalf of the whole board, I'm sure they would all agree. So thank you. Okay, we're going to move on now. Or Chief, I'm sorry, Chief, were you done your report, or is there more?
That is, let me clear, so I got too many screens here. No, I just want, oh yes, and one very important thing, I touched on this. The live streaming of our meetings, I think, is very, very positive for our service and our community and our board. And I think with everything that our whole community is navigating through, I think it would be really, it's really important that we acknowledge the work of Dr. Mercer and public health and every single healthcare worker and volunteer, essential workers, the countless people right now in our community who are literally giving their hearts to help us all navigate through what is a really extraordinary time. So I just wanted to say thanks to literally the countless number of people who without them, we couldn't navigate the current public health crisis that we're in. And that's it.
Great, thank you. Okay, let's move on now to item 710. Is there any new business from the board? Not seeing any. Christine, did you? No? Okay. Not seeing any. Information items. The next open meeting for all of our participants is going to be on Thursday, the third Thursday of the month, May 20th, and that will be at 2:30 p.m. And the OAPSB Spring Conference, an AGM, that's going to be attended by 2 board members. And that usually is an in-person conference, but of course this year it will be a virtual conference. So if there's no other business, then I would entertain a motion for adjournment. And Christine Billings, is there a seconder?
No.
Oh, okay. Hold on.
It's a question.
Yes, I'm sorry.
So did the mayor not have something to add? Mr. Mayor?
Yes, I added a quick agenda item for discussion.
Oh, yes.
Mr. Chair. Yeah, would I be able to do that now?
Yes, you would.
Okay, just 1 second. My dog's freaking out in the background. Sorry, everyone. Just 1 second.
I understand. We have a bird that tends to do that sort of thing, so I get it.
Sorry. I just calmly talked to my dog there. I did not yell. Okay. Through you, Mr. Chair. What I want to broach here as a discussion point is something that has really started to become, I believe, an issue. And what I want to do is I want to get to a point here, or maybe moving a motion of the board to request information. But let me give the story that I feel is an issue. And that is that, you know, whenever I'm reading, and the community is talking to me about this as well. So it's not just a mayor thing. Whenever I'm reading any of the press releases from the police in regards to, their daily media releases about incidences that are happening in the community, it is extremely common to see at the end of the description of people that have been arrested that they're arrested whatever the crime is, and then it says, and also breach of probation. And sometimes it's multiple, 5 cases of breach of probation. The other thing that is becoming a bit more common as of late is stories of people being arrested for a criminal activity, and then they're arrested the same day later on or the next day. And so one of the things that's been a concern of the community, a concern of mine is, how is this interacting with the right for somebody, a victim of crime, to see through to the end whatever justice needs to be served? And then also how it's interacting with COVID right now, COVID regulations of releasing people through different forms, so that and delays in trials and those types of occurrences. And I'm just wondering if we could get a report back from the staff to just, if there's a way of doing this, identify our prolific repeat offenders that are in the community for property crime and or drugs or other related issues that are just very, I would like to see the data. And I'd like to see the data if it really truly is an issue, and we can identify it through data, or, and I'd like to see too, Mr. Chair, if we could see it where, if we can understand what the repeat offense is, if it is related to, I would say drugs and or addiction issues, then there's both a enforcement issue here to maybe look to investigate further, but there's also a completely non-enforcement issue here as well. That's social services issues, counseling, other funding and investments that can be made in other areas so that these types of potential crimes don't occur in the first place. So it'd be interesting to gather that data of our prolific repeat offenders and have something like a report come back to the board to see how much of an issue that actually is in the community, because it would be good to see the numbers. And then from that, we can use that, leveraging that to see what could be done either at the local level, Mr. Chair, or with upper levels of government as well, to see these issues through to where they need to go, either for justice to be served and the right enforcements to be had, or other methods, non-enforcement methods that we can advocate for to the upper levels of government. So I hope I explained it well enough. I know that there's been other communities that have looked into this, and it's been quite telling. So I would like to move a motion that the Police Services Board direct the police staff to come back next month with a report that identifies prolific repeat offenders and the categories to which those issues are being created, and to just inform us further and for further consideration. Yeah. And I think Councillor Billings is willing to second that. I'll stop. I think I saw the chief's hand go up, and maybe Christine Billings too.
I'm going to second it, Mr. Chair, but I just wanted to know from the chief if 1 month turnaround time is enough time in order to compile the data. Chief.
I'm not sure. So if 2 months was an option, that would, if it's ready in a month, we can give it. But if 2 months was an option.
So up to 2 months.
Okay. And then I just want to clarify through you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Mayor, when you say identify, I assume you're identifying instances, not people.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Right. No, through you, Mr. Chair, in no way was I suggesting, going against any privacy issues at all. Zero. Yeah. Okay. Both from those that are alleged, those that have been arrested, or even the victims, like nothing like that at all. The incidences that have occurred, and under what category are they occurring under? Petty theft, car break-in, bicycle theft, drug-related, whatever that is, so we can get a sense of that data. But I would change my motion then to 2 months, not 1.
Okay, and so was that you, Mr. Mayor? Let me.
I think Board Member Peter McSherry had a question, Mr. Chair.
Oh, sorry, Peter.
Yeah, back in my early days of being a lawyer, I did a fair bit of duty counsel and bail court. And the more offenses you had like this, the harder it'd be to get out. So I'd be kind of interested to know, like, how many offenses are coming from the same individual. I can see if somebody gets 2 in one day, should be much, much harder for them to get released the next time they come up to bail court. So I'd kind of like to know how that interplays with all of this as well.
May I jump in here on that? That probably could form part of your research, Chief, on this, and to answer that question, because it may take a little while to actually formulate that. Does that make sense to everyone? Is that okay with you, Peter?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Any other questions for our chief?
Yeah, maybe just for
our deputy chief has his hand up.
It may not be a question for the chief, maybe for the mayor. Are you looking for data on those that have been charged and are currently charged with an offense, or are you looking for people that have a record already and are charged? Because there's difference.
Let me look at some of the notes I have here, Deputy. Well, a lot of, yeah, I understand what you're asking through you, Mr. Chair. A lot of what I'm asking for is I think, and this is maybe a bit above my knowledge, but there's different forms that can be used for the accused. Either it's bail with condition or what's the other forms? Promise to appear. Those types of forms that can be used. I'm sorry, I don't have them in front. Oh, I think form 9, 10, and 11, I think are the ones that are mostly identified. And so it'd be under that context that I'm looking for. Not, no, I would think it would be quite difficult to do the one that you suggested there. I mean, I don't want you to be going back 10 years because someone had one criminal offense and then there's nothing, and then all of a sudden there's another offense. I wouldn't want to capture that data, Deputy. But one of the things that one of the other services did that I've been doing some research on is that they actually just went to a lot of the officers that know some of the frequent flyers that are constantly having these issues, and they got sort of a snapshot, again protecting privacy, of what these issues are. And that might be another way of forming the data that you need. But I think you understand what I'm trying to get at. I just don't know how logistically you would want to figure that out.
So maybe if I can suggest just giving us some latitude in terms of how we gather it, because we have to delve down and we'll see what data we can pull out. I think I know where you're going. It sounds like you're looking at those that are up on charges and are recharged while they are awaiting charges. If I'm catching just correctly?
I think so, Deputy, and through you, Mr. Chair. Remember, in my context, I also indicated how there's been a lot of sort of justice not served because of COVID too, right? So it's really kind of in the last year and a bit that that I would like to see a snapshot of as we're dealing with the COVID impacts. There's also justice that needs to be. The justice system needs to continue to go, and I understand COVID is even interrupting that system too. I understand that, but it's coming even out of COVID. Are we going to get, I have no idea, are we going to get into statute of limitations where certain things that people have been accused of and that need to have their day in court are going to end up not being there? Then I don't know what the regulations are off the top of my head in that. What I'm trying to get at is that there are victims of crime in our community, and it's important that they see justice be served. And I want to make sure that any of the impacts, especially around COVID, aren't kind of pushing these things to the side with especially prolific repeat offenders.
Peter?
Yeah, I'm going to suggest that if we want to be able to draw any conclusions about COVID, we should take a sample that would be at least as long as COVID on the other side to give a representative sample, if not slightly longer. If we're trying to draw a conclusion about COVID, so that if we're going to do the last 15 months, we should perhaps go back, at least 30 months, if not, and put a time horizon on this, of the time period we're asking them to do the research for.
Okay, and Rod, Karen?
Just to make a suggestion, maybe speak a bit about release procedures, because that's in it too. Like if an officer goes on a call and it's a summary conviction offense, then he has to release on a Form 9, or if there's some other circumstances, then he brings them in or the person in and they're released on a promise to appear. But if an individual is released on a promise to appear and commits another criminal offense, especially if it's indictable, then it becomes a reverse onus, and the officer has the option to hold that person for another bail hearing or release on a recognizance with conditions. And that's a little more stricter. And then the person can always breach that and be held again for a bail hearing. So,
Mr. Chair, I think Rod is correct. That's where I mentioned the Form 9, 10, and 11 have those different definitions to them, and so maybe that could be explained in the report as well. I'm not doing it justice myself. But I just think this would be very interesting to get this information, and I do want to give some leeway to. I think the context is understood by staff, and I think they get what we're trying to do here, and I think if that comes back in that manner, I'm sure it will give us somewhat of a snapshot about what's going on.
Okay. Chief?
And just for our clarity here, for our folks who are going to gather the data, are you going to have a motion, like a kind of a wording in your motion? You're going to pass a motion, or are you just going to, or do you want us to kind of?
Well, there is already a motion, Mr. Chair, on the floor. After the motion was moved and seconded by myself and Councillor Billings, then a lot of commentary started going on after that, but it's not. I think the commentary can be taken, Mr. Chair, if it's up to you, obviously. I think the commentary can be taken as friendly advice, but I think the context of the motion stands on its own merits.
Yeah, I like to think of it as discussion on the motion. Yeah. And so I'm now going to call for a show of hands on the motion. All those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So now, is there any new business? I'm not seeing any. I think I talked earlier about the next open meeting, Thursday, May 20th, and the OAPSB, Ontario Association of Police Service Boards, for those who are not familiar with that acronym. So that brings us to the end of our open meeting agenda. And do I have a motion for adjournment? Mr. Mayor and Christine Billings seconding. All those in favor? And that's carried. Thanks, everyone.